Well, it is. Steve Rosen is with us tonight from Vancouver. Robert is some distance south of Mexico City. Robert Mitchell. We have several states in the United States here. Misha represents not only New Hampshire, but also Ukraine. Okay.
Maine.
What did I say? New Hampshire?
Okay.
Okay.
Just to clarify, the meeting is not streaming live on YouTube. It's just being recorded by YouTube, and it's going to be an unlisted
Link.
URL.
Phone number.
Yeah.
Okay, so off we go. Our stated title was Getting Gebser, and the motivation being, how do we get Gebser, comma, now? So Mike, you're number one.
Me?
You, Mike.
Oh, well, how do we get Gebser now? What I've been thinking recently is going back to a paper I presented a couple of years ago that the now, and we could go back to phenomenology, the fullness, the duration of, and so forth. It's really mysterious. Somehow it's a stew of all of the different structures of consciousness. And Alma Kunis sent us a paper recently, and I call it the ever-present mythic. And I think each of the modes of consciousness are ever present, but somehow, and maybe it's different in different places, maybe we're talking about Einsteinian relativity, but somehow there's a stew of different modes of consciousness that are all mixed together. Like I just saw my cat go across the room, and that cat is very sensitive. I picked up little grains of cat litter and I threw them on the floor, and that cat just jumped. There's something special in the way that consciousness is gathered in the moment with the person. And I'll just say two things that are I'm working right now. I'm reading another book that John recommended on quantum physics, and that's kind of stirring my mind. But the other one that's really setting up my sense that the mental structure of consciousness really began about 10,000 years ago with the beginnings of the rise of the cities, and maybe with the gatherings even of tribal peoples that we're beginning to find out about. But the book that I'm reading is The Biography of God. And it's looking at the Old Testament, the Jewish Old Testament, as a literary work. And that's blowing my mind. So I'll just leave it there. Do we lose sound?
Robert.
Oh, okay.
Robert Mitchell, unmute.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I was muted. Well, yeah, that was kind of a surprise to call on me second. All right, thanks anyway. What I'm working on right now is that I'm going to do that lecture that I did at Asilomar. I'm going to do in Kusnak at the Jung Institute, probably in February. And so I'm working on that. And there's an article that I wrote in conjunction with that. It's a chapter in a book that's supposed to come out this year as well, a book from Routledge called Jung in the Classroom. So actually, I'm kind of glad that you brought that up about your son, John, because my thoughts about all this are that integrality, it's what Gebser said, that integrality has to become a reality, because if we don't go there, then we're going to destroy ourselves. And for me, the way to do that is through educating young people. You have to give them that opportunity and show them that possibility. You show them the people in history who have become integrated or individuated personalities. I was just reading recently Eric Neumann's book on art. I think it's called Art in the Collective Unconscious. And he talks about Leonardo da Vinci and Marc Chagall as being individuated personalities or integral personalities, because I look at individuated and integral as the same thing. So, you know, it seems to me that the work of our generation, the work of the people who are now at an age where they are beyond, this is not coming out the way I want it to, but the purpose of our generation, the work of our generation, is to instill that objective in younger children, that they can achieve an integral personality. They can achieve this integral thing. And the way that I look at it is through a cultural education curriculum, where there's only one culture on this planet. It is the cultural continuum of humanity. And that's the approach I take to it. So that's what we should be teaching in the schools. And we're not. We're still stuck in that economic mode where we're just training kids to be parts of the socioeconomic machine. Anyway, I'll pass the stick.
When you're in Switzerland there, Robert, ask around about the Forest School and see if you can go visit. It's near St. Gallen.
Where is that in relationship to Zurich?
It's about an hour southwest.
It's called, okay, it's called what's the name of the school again?
The Forest School, Forest. And the kids are literally like, they go to school in the forest every day.
Oh, and it's near St. Gallen, you said, Gallan?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is all very good, but actually we don't have discussion between the presentations.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Thanks, Lisa.
We'll make it. All right, Jeffrey Keel.
Where is Gebser now? That's
How do we find Gebser now?
mhm.
With a comma in there. The caesura.
Well, yeah, I guess I can only speak for where Gebser is in me now. I've my almost every minute I have now to devote to my own inner work is focused on the subject of alchemy. So I've really spent a tremendous amount of hours per day working and doing alchemy. So I guess the question would then for me be, where is Gebser in alchemy? And I see Gebser in alchemy as I'm reading alchemical texts or books on alchemy. Of course, the mythic and magic state structures of consciousness are very present in alchemy. But I think in particular, for me, the philosopher's stone is the integral. It's that state of integration that Robert was talking about. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I don't really have a lot to say other than a tremendous amount of my energy and time is focused on sinking into the alchemical container and entering the state of dissolution and coagulation over and over. That's about it.
Matt and Mark.
Wow. A lot of what's already been said is stirring in me. I feel two things primarily. One is kind of a continual opening and a broadening vision of kind of what I can't see and what's possible to be seen. And then also an urgency to try to transmit that along. I work with a lot of students, beginning students in the art therapy field in particular. And I find myself always like a marble in a bowl rolling down to the center point. And a lot of Gebser is right there where it lands when I find myself trying to explain what's going on in psychology, what's going on in imagery. Gebser continually comes to mind, as does Jung, of course. But, and I find I was interested in Robert's comments. I very much agree. And one of the things that I feel passionate about is that students have been inculcated into a particular narrow frame of understanding their place in the world and the various capacities that they have for engagement with life. And I think it's a great loss. I think it's a great problem in psychology. And that's where I feel a sense of urgency for myself now, or in myself now around Gebser, is that there's this widening vision in me, and yet this sense of urgency of trying to transmit that openness. And that's why he's here.
Yeah. What?
Anything to say?
No, I'm just here to listen mostly.
Me too, mostly. That's it for me. Thank you.
Steve Rosen.
Getting Gebser now, emphasis on the now. I guess it means, as some of you have already suggested, embodying integral consciousness, integrality, which to me means, I've mentioned this in previous meetings, a process of dialogue in which I am present in this room with my body now. I'm not talking about wholeness, about integral consciousness. I'm not talking about it. I'm embodying it. And I know that at least some of you are familiar with David Bohm's approach to dialogue, which we've called proprioceptive dialogue, because it entails becoming aware of my own process this very moment, rather than sending out to you bits of content, abstractions that take me out of the room, but being present in this room at this moment. As long as I'm only theorizing about Gebser's integral consciousness, I don't get Gebser now. So it's this dialogue process, it's a matter of becoming aware in real time, in the moment, of my heart rate increasing as I'm concerned about putting on a performance here. I have the talking stick, so I'm having a bit of performance anxiety as I speak. That's what's real for me now. And relating to you on that basis, so that instead of just sending my projections, I retract my projections. Gebser and Jung were both interested in that. Retract these projections and share the retractions with you, listening as deeply as I possibly can. Yeah. That does it.
Rick?
Well, I thought I would share why this even came up. I was in Lisa's class on language and met Edma Hood and hi Misha in that process. And offline, I was having a dialogue with Ed about how we actually came to Gebser or Jung. And so I thought it was interesting because are those seminal moments that actually shift your way of being? And then how do you, as Stephen says, integrate or embody that? And I told Ed, since he couldn't be here tonight, I would make up a story for him, but I think I'll tell the real story for him. He was in Southern California and was going to a German Rosicrucian group. And after a while, when he was leaving one of the meetings, one of the leaders, as they were walking to the parking lot, opened a trunk with a bunch of books and junk in the back and pulled out Gebser's Ever-Present Origin in German and said, "You need to read this." And he said that basically shifted his life, and since then it had driven how he looks at and views things, along with many other things that he's interested in. And I shared with him my story of how I came to Gebser. As I went to a mystery school with Jean Houston, and at one of those in New York, and one of those meetings, she held up the Ever-Present Origin and said, if you really want to know about culture and a broad overview, you need to read this book. So I decided that, okay, I'll pick it up. I opened it up. I read about a paragraph and immediately was overwhelmed by the language and not knowing what anything was going on. So I put it away. And then about a year later, after going through some of the Jung information and some of the Joseph Campbell materials and things like that, I came back to Gebser. And since then, it has become part of an embodied piece of how I look at the world. And that's the only way I can say is, how do you look at Gebser now? It's that, how do you frame experiences, information in a way to piece together things that you can test Gebser or Jung or anybody else on whatever your belief structure is, on a daily basis, depending on what kind of articles you read or books you read, and say, how does this fit with Gebser? How does this fit with Jung? How does this fit with Christian ideology? Whatever it is that is there. And so that's how I've been looking at it. So that's the one thing that I would like to pass along, that a book that Ed recommended that I haven't been able to read yet, but is by Owen Barfield, I think is his name, on saving the appearances, which is about icons. And so it's more in that magic mythic structure, which sounds like something interesting. But so for Gebser now, I think because I've embodied a lot of the way he looks at things, I don't sit around and intellectualize it a lot, but what I do is try and sort through as a way to view the world and view experiences. So, and how come your talking stick changes when it gets to me? Also, I'll give it back to you.
Received. Eileen. This is the world. This is the world we live in these days. Unmute thyself and be free.
I did,
Eileen,
but
okay.
somebody muted me. Okay, I'll start again. I lost my flow, but I will get it back because Gebser is in the room. I was saying that this is new to me, intriguing. It's nothing that I can hang on to yet, and that's goes with the thought. I mean, it's you don't take bits of information and put them together. It's not like philosophy. It's a kind of in between, and to take on consciousness. Consciousness is like the communal conversation right now within philosophy, within physics, and I see it as the most important thing to investigate as much as we can. So I'm grateful to be part of this strange, intriguing endeavor. Strange is, by the way, a complimentary word.
Indeed, you are among friends. Bob Pillar.
Well, I came here mostly to observe and report back to Royce in New York. But the subject is, of course, intriguing. Of what do you do once you have begun to get Gebser? Where do you go next? Well, you folks have a group out on the West Coast. As far as we've been able to tell, there's nothing yet here on the East Coast where I am. Seems to me that we have to start to create some forms that indeed bring in a younger generation of people and introduce them to this thought. I've spent a number of years now absorbing a bunch of Jungian thought, and have worked my way through the alchemy books, his alchemy writings as well. And I've come to think that one of Jung's greatest contributions, in addition to the understanding and making us aware of the power of image, is that he introduced the language to us, words we can use to better understand our own experiences of consciousness. And my question had been for some long time as, what comes after Jung? Where do you go next? And for me, Gebser starts to introduce that answer. And there's, of course, a huge amount of overlapping information and different approaches to the same material. And so you go from a community that probably numbers only in the thousands in the Jungian community to a much smaller community of Gebser. But I think it's incumbent upon us to try to bring those communities together and to expand on the Jungian learning with the new learning we have from Gebser.
Daniel.
Yes, just a quick note. I've just finished reading Saving the Appearances. It's a phenomenal book. It's about the third time I've read it. It's a classic. It's well worth your time. It's very much about the mental consciousness structure, though, as well as mythic magic. Anyway, so getting Gebser now, I mean, there's so much one could say. What is, I think, living with me most immediately, I do relate to the queries as to how, we can act as guides for the younger generation to make significant contact with this wisdom that someone like Gebser represents, as well as Jung and Steiner and these elders, all of whom are playing different tunes on the same instrument. And for me, what is kind of paramount at the moment, thinking in an American context, is what seems to me a current forgetting of history. Gebser was a Kulturphilosopher and a cultural historian. You don't get Gebser without historical knowledge. You don't get to the original relation, in Emerson's words, which is the now, without an understanding of the past. Otherwise, you're just unconsciously repeating habitual patterns of thought. And it seems to me that the political intellectual climate of the last 3-4 decades, since I was in graduate school at Cornell in the 70s, well, that dates me. I mean, that's almost half a century. That's when Derrida was just coming to the fore, and post-structuralism and postmodernism, which in some way has given rise in some subtle currents and not so subtle currents to the political climate today and identity politics and so forth. But there's a premise of a kind of license to dismiss metaphysics, the Western metaphysical tradition, and to dismiss huge swaths of Western European intellectual history because it's Western European. And I feel as if this is a profound mistake, not that the mind does not need to be expanded to be open to other cultures, but we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We are children of a given intellectual historical stream. We're not shamans. We can train to be such, but we're in this context. And it seems to me that part of the way of getting Gebser is to reclaim a sense which has been largely lost of the profound, and this relates to what Robert was saying about education, the necessity of knowing a bit about one's intellectual and cultural history and the informing ideas and the stream from the Greeks through the Christ, through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and Romantics and Emerson and Whitman, so that we are not operating out of a profoundly deficient mental and mythical, which is where we are. The culture is just pervaded by profoundly deficient mental, mythical consciousness structures. When the wisdom to get Gebser is there, and it's in our own cultural founding fathers like Emerson, who has deep affinities with Gebser. Emerson is forgotten. His address of the religious problem, his address of scholarship. This is all as if it never happened. And we won't get Gebser here in America until, we recover a sense of the pertinence of that intellectual history, which is also the pertinence and sacredness of intelligence, of mind, of nous in the Greek terms. So that's what I'm kind of working on. I'm working on Emerson and everything that went into Emerson, which is just about everything, just as it is for Gebser or Jung or these other seminal thinkers.
Misha?
Yes, well, thank you, everybody. It's not only Gebser, it's this group that inspired me to speak right now. I thought I would pass. And Stephen, thank you for mentioning performance anxiety, which it's like huge for me. And plus, English is my second language, and I always I listen and I think, what am I going to say? And then I'm learning to, well, whatever will come to my mind, that's what I will say. So that's what I'm doing now. But as I was listening, I kind of looked around, as I always do. And so I have the book of the ever-present origin that I'm reading. So I'm still learning from Gebser, who I find the most original thinker I have ever read. And just like everything he reads or he writes, how he puts everything, it's like you really feel that he felt that he lived that. And one of the things that I took from him is the way how he looks at art, and it really was influenced me lately. The these examples he gives and how he sees art, how art is eternal, and how it's really you can see through art you can travel in time. He inspired me to get the book of Jacopo da Pontormo, which I also have here, and meant a lot for me to get acquainted with this artist, for example. Another thing, there was another book that I'm reading now, and it's about the molly spotted elk, the Wabanaki Native American woman who was a performer, and she actually collected legends and myths of Wabanaki people in Maine. And she lived in Indian Island from a big family, poor Native American family, but she became quite, well, she went on her individuation process in a remarkable way. She ended up in Paris and married a French journalist whose name is Jean, well, difficult name, but the interesting. So I kind of like, I looked at the, like I highlighted some things in the, what I was reading, and like she had to escape before the war. Jean, her husband was Jewish, my understanding. So she had to escape France in the 1940, and Gebser did too, right? He had to, and so she had a daughter who was several years old, and she had to go through by hiking over the Pyrenees with her young daughter, and it was very difficult. So that's like always through it's like that everything is possible, and this interconnectedness that's ever present, and that you know, the name is ever present origin. There is something that's ever present, that's eternal. Or whether we look at art, that's or we listen to each other, or we just look around, and if we are present, this ever present origin will be present. Thank you.
Well, as we used to say in the Baptist church I grew up in, amen. Now, I'm not supposed to make comments like that, but Baptists don't always follow all the rules. Okay. And now this famous rule, maker, breaker, Glenn Aparicio Perry. You're on.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. What a blessing to be gathered here through the Zoom. What a blessing for the ancestors that made this possible, including obviously Jean Gebser and Jung. Thank you so much. I mean, this is momentous. What a great question. Thank you so much. How do we get Gebser now? Whew. How do we not get him now? This is, as I read today on Facebook from Brandt, who's not represented here. He said, I think I quote, "I cannot live without Gebser now." So thank you, Brandt, for saying that. Thank you, Daniel. Your talk in the world before the COVID world is coming back freshly in my mind now, bringing back Emerson into the conversation. Thank you so much. I think that is a very true statement you said about Emerson being a lens through, I'm paraphrasing what you're saying, but Emerson being a lens through how we can understand Gebser in America. Yeah, I haven't forgotten Emerson. He's dear in my heart all the time. And in fact, my favorite quote in the world is from Emerson. He says, "All our progress is an unfolding like the vegetable plant. You first have an instinct, then an opinion, then a knowledge. As the plant has root, bud, and fruit. Trust your instinct to the end, though you can render no reason. It is vain to hurry it. By trusting it to the end, it shall ripen into truth, and you shall know why you believe." I agree with you, Daniel. That's a wonderful way of looking into the lens of from the archaic, magical, mythical, mental. And it's a beautiful way to allow the flower of consciousness, the continuum of consciousness to flower, to not jump rational thought to the head of the line, to allow yourself to be in the world, to be full of the instincts that make us who we are, that make us human. And when I think of Gebser, and I think of Gebser now, I'm thinking, what is the most eventful thing that has happened worldwide in the last year is obviously the COVID, the novel coronavirus. And I think viruses and bacteria are a wonderful window into linking the past, present, and future, what we call the past, present, and future, which are really ever present in a human body. A human body is the embodiment of evolution. I mean, when we're born, when we're in the womb, we come through and we are a tadpole, then a fish, then, a mammal. We are born in water. We're born in water, just like all the creatures on this planet were born in water. And the first, believed to be the first microorganisms were the viruses and bacteria. They have this ancient history. We are related, as I often say, as an indigenous peoples often say, we're related to everything. We're absolutely related to everything, but we're radically related to bacteria and viruses in ways that just aren't spoken of enough. I mean, I think I'm correct. I mean, 3% of our body weight is bacteria. I think 90% of our cells, and we don't really even know about 95% of our DNA. We don't really know exactly what that is, and we call that so-called junk DNA, which is an absurd term. But a lot of that is related to bacteria and viruses. All of evolution comes through bacteria and viruses. So this novel coronavirus is obviously an agent of evolution in so many ways. And yes, it's disrupted society and the norms that we knew, which can be a very beautiful thing, because as we all know in this group, what we were doing was equivalent to, I would put it in the terms, I'm going to quote Oren Lyons. Oren Lyons once was invited to a meeting in Switzerland with those, I forget what that meeting is, Davos, Switzerland, with all the leading entrepreneurs of the world. And Oren once said to them, you guys are you're a jockey on a horse, and you're whipping your horse faster and faster and faster and faster, and you're trying to get to the finish line. But unfortunately, the finish line is a brick wall. And what we're doing is we're moving ourselves in a way that ensures the extinction of a lot of life on this planet, including ours, if we don't change. I believe we will change. I'm an optimist by heart, and I believe we are in this time, I just love this question. Thank you. Because we are in a time when everything is being disrupted. So this is what Gebser was talking about, and certainly time itself is being disrupted. In the United States, we had Donald Trump, who was very obviously a trickster figure, who wanted to roll back the clock and make America great again, whatever that meant, whatever that time was. And it's, never mind the fact that that was something that I heard come out of the mouth of Bill Clinton when he announced his presidency, and Ronald Reagan had said many times, make America great again. Somehow, because Donald Trump is a marketer, he made it stick to him. But Donald Trump was more not as much cause as symptom of a world that was breaking apart, and authoritarian governments were on the rise. And literally, he did in the United States become a catalyst for what was already happening. And we talk about the deficient mental. Oh my God! I mean, we went to the absurd where nobody could agree on anything, and the most basic of facts were thrown out the window. So I just I think that your question is spot on, and Gebser could not be any more present with us today, and that's a damn good thing, because we need some interpreters here to see what is going on, to not panic, and to be able to move through it if we're going to emerge to a place of integrality at some time in the future. So thank you so much. Beautiful. I really enjoy this group. Thank you. I have another staff, so I'm passing it back to you, John. Thank you.
I got it as we're getting it. Okay. Pablo Devanzo. Pablo.
There.
There.
Thank you, John. I was gonna say, can you hear me?
Not the best,
Can
but
you
we
hear
can
me?
hear you. We can hear you. Yes. The video is shaky.
Okay. Oops. Okay, that's because I live in the mountains of Carmel Valley. Let me see if I can increase the volume. So let me see. Whoops. Where'd the video go? Here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you so much. I'm here as a guest honoring our friendship, John and Lisa. I'm disqualified by the fact that I haven't read Gebser. I have to say is basically out of your initial comment, John, about how things may have changed forever. I have the feeling that in this country, at least, we're sort of witnessing the closing of a vital space. And what I can share with you is my experience as a child psychiatrist, in which I have access to children who and adolescents who come to share some of their problems in brief moments of truthfulness. And one of the things that I think is quite apparent to me, at least, is what Daniel Polikov was talking about in terms of a divorce, a radical divorce between our time and history. So what I have to share with you is that they have a certain concern that is almost automatic, if you wish, about certain themes that have to do with racial inequality, and reminds me of a comment that Jeffrey Keel offered many sessions ago regarding the fact that the civil war in this country has not ended. I think the current generation of teenagers have a feeling that there's racial inequality, and yet, if you really ask them about the differences between, let's say, Luther King and Malcolm X, they have no clue. They have absolutely no clue. They have not read a word of Malcolm X. They have not read a word of Martin Luther King. So I'm faced myself as an adult, as a middle-aged guy and as an old guy, with this bridge in which I'm trying to constantly provide for a translation that is very difficult. It's almost like we're talking about different languages. And I'm hoping that elsewhere things are different. I had the opportunity recently on a sort of an optimistic note, as Glenn was saying a moment ago, to witness a video of very young children participating in a massive protest that has been going on in India since November. The farmers of northern India from Punjab, which are Sikhs, are protesting for the rights to be able to sell their crops in an open market. And the big corporate power in India, the equivalent of, I don't know, Google and Facebook, the equivalent of the folks that we have in power here, are trying to dismantle them. Basically, they're trying to crush them. And it was very moving to see this little group of pre-adolescents. These are 7, 8-year-olds, drive up in their bicycles and start shouting songs of "Long live the revolution, long live the revolution." And I'm thinking, wow, what the hell? I mean, how did they learn that there's a word called revolution and there's a word called long live? It almost gave me a little seed of hope about the possibility that we may have of translating all the knowledge of our humanities, our social sciences, in maybe towards a world of historical possibilities. In the midst of an ecological disaster, as far as I know, I mean, John and I, we've talked about this before. The book that I'm currently reading is the last book that Elizabeth Kolbert published. She's the author of The Sixth Extinction. It's called Under a White Sky, The Nature of the Future. Pulitzer Prize winner. She's the expert for the New Yorker in terms of global warming. I recommend the book. I like her work. Anyway, that's a couple of thoughts that I could share with you. I'm very interested in your comment, John, about how things have probably changed for good, whether we like it or not.
We will have discussion once we have completed our circle. Conrad, do you wish to address the assembled? Hello, Conrad. Calling Conrad.
Hey, hi there. No, I am just fascinated by listening to everyone's story. I really don't have anything other than I'm eating spaghetti and meatballs.
I think that's very embodied of you. David Alexander, who I will indulge myself to say, David entered our society and at large at the Gebser conference in Monterey in 2012. And a few of you will remember that. It seems like about 500 years ago. David? Unmute, please.
Okay, there we go. I would say that was one of the more unusual Gebser conferences on a number of levels. It was quite exciting. And it was, I had studied the EPO with different groups over the last 30 years. And it's always a breath of fresh air to get together with people who enjoy discussing the state of being, I guess is the best way I would put it. So Mike, I don't have a large contribution for this evening. I just thinking, I'm thinking about, I think about Gebser all the time, and say everything that we study with Jung has some way is related to Gebser, and so I'm thinking about what am I going to do for the next discussion period that's coming up. And I want to do something on alchemy, and I think how to alchemy and Jung, and I've almost decided that. But what's interesting is that Gebser comes into it is what do we mean by the stages of consciousness, and how do we actually relate that to how we're living our lives, and I think looking back at the alchemists and how are we looking at it, alchemists alchemists probably looked at alchemy, at least some of them did from a magical point of view, but not all. Many were very well grounded and were trying to divine how things worked, how life worked.
Yes, indeed. So
that's so I'm always interested in what other people have to say about where are we really when we say today, well, we're coming into integral consciousness, and I'm going, well, what does that mean? And I ask myself, I'm not so sure. So I need to have other people talk about what does it mean to them? How does integral consciousness relate to how you live your life, or how you live your life now as opposed to 30 years ago for those of us who can do that. And so I'm fascinated by what everyone has to say. No, that's my 2 cents.
Robin.
It's nice to see familiar faces. And I'm sorry I was late. I don't really know what we're talking about exactly, but I'll just say I'm happy to listen tonight because I'm not a reader of Gebser. Most of what I know is from you all and from what I learned from our Jung group. And I will say that during COVID, I've really been contemplating time because time feels really different. And at the beginning, to me, it felt vertical. And I've never used that term before, but I just felt like I was in this kind of silo of time. And I thought about Gebser and, kind of, I don't know, that there was no past and we don't know the future. And my artwork is about the liminal. And so I made a lot of artwork this last summer and tried to put that feeling into the artwork. And I think it came out as it should have, and I can't explain it. And it's has something to do with the integral consciousness, I think. So it's what you're all saying has been sinking in, and it's having an effect. So that's a good thing. Thank you.
Lisa.
Gebser, good. Like Gebser. And then next I wrap my arm around you, press my heart into yours, trusting that I will not fall, while fading into the oblivion of music and moving and breathing and losing myself in the dance. Of foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, beloved by philosophers, statesmen, and divines. And so here I am, a facet of a diamond with 16 other facets. And I struggle, I try in an aperspectival way to go into the diamond and try to look from Mike's facet and Rick's facet and Pablo's facet and Robert's facet and Daniel's facet and Misha and Robin and Conrad and David and Bob and Jeff and John and Matt and Mark and Glenn. I try, I fail. But it is my belief that we will get there. I don't know how many generations it will take. I don't know if generations and time even matters with regard to getting there. But to see through the generations, to see that my mother's great-grandfather and John's great-great-great-grandchildren are actually all me as well. I am them and they are me. And we are all together. Cuckoo Kichu. I know I'm mixing songs there, sorry. It's a challenge, and in lucid Gebserian moments, you know, I think I'm like getting closer to touching something. But then I get hungry and I, you know, have to open the refrigerator and rifle around for a while. And it goes away. What's the word I want? The trials and tribulations of getting nowhere and everywhere are exciting and frustrating and everything else in between. And I'm hoping, I'm giving it, you know, my best effort right now to to look for and imagine and hopefully work with people to help us develop ways to get kind of unstuck from the mental quagmire that our particular form of language has gotten us into.
Yeah.
And I look forward to being in a position, you know, at some point to share that with you. But that's how I'm getting Gebser now. Is you know, he was very interested in finding a new form of language, and I'm trying to take up that mantle and do that in my own sort of way. Okay, thank you all for being here too. This is really wonderful.
So I've been taking notes. I'll just scan them and send them to you. I'm actually going to stroll through these in a reverse circumambulation. So if we've been going this way, we'll take a little this way. I'm not going to try to establish mental rational narrative continuity. I can explain why quantum physics is a good reason to not strive for continuous narrative continuity under all circumstances, but Gebser has the term diaphony, which comes to me, Satori, you know, this is Satori. Samsara is nirvana. Diaphony. And we could do the whole root of that word and it would be lovely, but I'm going to keep moving. It's spiritual. And my core connection with Gebser is of a spiritual nature, as is my connection with Sergei Jung. I would say something of the change that is happening was expressed by my friend Norman O. Brown, who talked of global telepathic intercommunion. That was his way with words. Nobby. Global telepathic intercommunion. I would say, Glenn, and I don't remember who said everything, I'm going in this reverse circumambulation, but to say in the last year, COVID is the big story, I would say co-equal with communication, such as what we're having right now. And the revolution in education that is occurring as we speak, in all the ways that have been touched upon. And the young, my grandson would enjoy me telling you, my oldest grandson turned 11 years old today. He was born on April 1st. Jasper is 11. We had a very strong meeting of minds last night in a pre-birthday convergence. And I felt very strengthened and encouraged by my grandson. There's a sense that I think is worth talking about now and then. I've brought it up before, and that is the deficient integral. And I think in some ways that could be descriptive of some of your, well, Pablo's concerns around the table with sort of shocking things of, let's say, children not having cultural reference and context. And there's a lot here of great value and importance that must be dealt with. But on the other hand, there's an opening, there's an openness. I agree with Daniel and everyone else who has said, no, and Robert was emphasizing it. Yes, it's a time to stand up for educational emergence and reform. Yes, this is the time. I respect those classroom teachers who have to deal with absolutely impossible paradox every day in every classroom in America before COVID. But at any rate, communication has shifted on our planet. One note I enjoy when we talk about Emerson is that Nietzsche was a great devotee of Emerson. So in some ways, you know, ponder that. It's really intense and leads us right along with Gebser. Gebser said not exactly a new form of language, Lisa, he calls for a new form of statement. So he's really emphasizing the intentional act. When is it time for us to stand and speak, each of us? And I love this, which I got from Marshall McLuhan. Should all Aquinas be forgot? Transformation. There's a term that is mobile and Kleinian with the Jung and Gebser phenomenological excursions. Transformation. That we are always in transformation at all scales of magnitude, in all dimensions, all the time. Atemporally, amentionally, all the other A things. We live much with the deficient mental, but I think some serious work could be done by those who, I don't know who does such work, aligning the deficient and integral with all of its promise and dysfunction. And as you know, chaos means possibility. Chaotic systems have a lot of possibilities. You know, this is the stuff we learned in the 70s and 80s, and now's the time. Now's the time. Now's when it's in our face. Chaos connects, David Pete says. Yes, okay, let me move right along because I'm getting into a huge wrap. The politics of the unconscious. A big thing between Gebser talk and Jung talk in the past would be, well, there is no unconscious, Gebser says. And then Gebser says other sort of snarky things about Jung. It's all in there. However, Nathan Schwartz-Salant made the wrong call, Jeff, when he said Gebser didn't like Jung. Dear Nathan, I think, just didn't have enough time with Gebser, because Gebser goes back and forth and back and forth of like, well, Jung says this and you know, it goes so far, but it doesn't go any further. And then on the next page, it is, thank God Jung opened that portal, you know, and he contradicts himself. Therefore, he contradicts himself. He contains multitudes. But the structures of consciousness are archetypal. To discern the archaic, the magic, the mythic, and the mental, and the integral in our life patterns is to perceive archetypal patterns. Now, no one has really written that yet. But how do we look at individual development, educational development, but also geopolitical developments? And say, let's look at the unconscious in terms of, let's say, deficient mental. How many folks are aware of their deficient mental among the group? I mean, shadow, could we say that the deficient mental resides in the shadow? I think we damn well could. But then we also have within us all the mythic, both efficient and deficient at all times, in a dynamic, psychodynamic, Kleinian relationship at all scales. Steve's work really goes into this and canny detail. But through the mental into the magical, both efficient and deficient, but then I'm just about done. I think the most vital thing about Gebser for me now has been my own personal sense of almost boundless panic for the last 18 months. More political, actually, than. But then, my God, how do we even live with the suffering and death that is happening on planet Earth right now? I mean, Pablo's patients are struggling with this in pre-adolescence and adolescence, and my 11-year-old grandson, I think, qualifies now as a pre-adolescent. You know, how the urgency of our situation. Yes, that was said by several folks. We're going to need a lot of therapy, I think. I don't know, Pablo, I don't think there's enough psychiatrists in the world to get the job done. There's trauma. And we see the eruption of the archaic, the return of the ancient terrors in fascism in the 20th century. And Gebser's times are our times. How has the human race reacted to the shock? Steve, you say embodiment? How do we register the shock of the 20th century, which is in our marrow? Russia, Europe, the whole world. When things changed in August 1914, I don't think that shock is over yet. And then the great shock of 1945, it still shakes the foundations. But where we are with Gebser now, I'm about done, is community, I would say. And so everything that's been said here about the need to serve community, I'm for that. I'm for that. Because I don't want to be feel alone. I start having bad dreams. Okay, we can now open the floor up to, and what a floor it is. You know, I thought maybe we should have everybody again just say where you are in space tonight. Gebser makes a great deal of that, about the relative delusional factors involved in the spatialization of consciousness. So apparently we've made some progress with despatializing consciousness here. How are we feeling?
You wanna go around again? Just one thing that came to me, I was rereading Merleau-Ponty's Visible and the Invisible this last winter. Took me a long time to get through it, but it was almost traumatic. You could see that he was still resonating with, as you say, with the Second World War and with things that were still going on in France at the time. And I didn't get any of that the first time through. And that reminds me of one of my first articles on Gebser was Gebser's project, and how traumatizing those years were for Gebser and for all of us. I mean, I remember hiding under desks in grade school, you know, and the trauma of the nuclear bomb and all. And that's what part of what Gebser is picking up on and wanting us to be concrete and to deal with issues, as John is saying. And then, as Lisa said, we need imagination, not only knowledge and history, we need imagination to be able to see possibilities and to be concrete and carry them out. So just a thought.
Just raise your hand if you have a
John.
comment or, yeah, Pablo.
Yeah, John. So I have a comment about, first of all, I've always respected your fear and your panic a lot. I think that I feel very identified with your sense of urgency. And, you know, the question is, how do we pass on our panic? How do we transmit our sense of urgency to other people? Because I have the feeling that, for starters, culture has always been the privilege of a small minority, you know, a matter of wealth and time and good luck. And there's underprivileged people who have no clue of what we're talking about. And there's younger people who also have no clue of what we're talking about. So what are the avenues of transmission of this thing that we're holding together here today? Like Lisa was saying, we're holding it somehow together. How do we transmit that to your 11-year-old grandson? And one thought that I have, it's a footnote, and I hope it's, I would say, close to your experience as a teacher, is this. Across the board, 90% of the patients that are students that I see day in and day out are completely, 100% unmotivated by online schooling and the standard curriculum. In other words, when I hear my daughter years ago talk about, you know, the 10th grade geography and geology class in which they're teaching about the tectonic plates of the ocean, and I see her face being incredibly bored, I ask her, so is this really interesting to you? And she would immediately say, no, it isn't. What is it that you care about? And she would say, I care about global warming, about dolphins dying in the ocean. And yet, this is not what is being taught. We're almost like under a dinosaur curriculum. So this is not a transmission venue that is being passed on to the younger generations. I need to say, it's not happening online through regular education, John. It isn't. No. And I also want to say something about psychiatrists. The good psychiatrists, they're dying out. They're dead. You know, the younger generation is coming around on a conveyor belt in which they see patients every 15 minutes and they're, you know, medicating everything that talks and walks. And so that's the question. How do we transmit this awareness that we are holding together, all of us here today? How do we do it? That's my question.
Robert, I saw your hand.
Yeah, the thing that I try to do and that I'm really pretty much involved in is the idea that in every culture that has ever existed, the young people are taught to be the carriers of the culture, to make the culture go forward. And my argument now is that we really live in a global culture. We are just one humanity, and the cultural continuum of humanity needs to go forward by teaching it to the young. Now, one of the concerns that was brought up, I attended a recent IAJS conference, the International Association of Jungian Scholars, that there were several young people there who brought up the whole idea of transhumanism. And transhumanism, to me, this merger of human and technology, it's in direct conflict with that concept of a human cultural continuum that has been going on this planet for probably at least 100,000 years, or perhaps more. And that's the thing that we're not teaching to young people, is that they are the carriers of the culture, and the culture that they're carrying is the culture of humanity, not the culture of America or Germany or Japan or France, but the culture of the human cultural continuum. And we just need to continue to bring that forward. That's what Gebser was saying as well. I mean, bringing together consciousness and culture. Some of the Jungians are now beginning to really get into discussions about that connection. I mean, Jeff would probably say something about that as well. But it's this idea that we have to teach, that's what we have to teach the young, to be the carriers, to carry the human cultural continuum forward. Because if not, we're going to get into this transhumanism, this merger of technology and machine, and we're right at that threshold. So that's what I've been thinking about.
Glenn, unmute.
I agree.
Oh, Daniel.
Oh,
I
man.
agree.
Pablo, yeah.
No,
Glenn.
I was just going to say I agree, and maybe the way to do it is by, going back to the past, to history, like Daniel was saying. Referring them straight back to the past. Sound at the expense of sounding archaic and outdated and so on. They are under a barrage of virtual reality that is pervasive. This
Absolutely.
is Jean Baudrillard being enacted as we speak. Yeah.
I think in a sense, they're finding their cultural identities, their archetypal cultural identity in virtual reality. They get into virtual reality and they play these roles of the hero, or they play the role of the assassin, or yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Glenn. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very interesting what you're bringing in, Robert, and it's new to me, and I probably don't spend enough time around young people. I suggest that you Jungians could have you could start a wing of your organization called the Younger Generation, maybe. but anyway, I. But I also wonder, what is a human being? It's something I've thought about a lot, and I, I I think it's interesting what apparently the younger generation is talking about transhumanism, but I wonder if they realize how radically interrelated we already are with all the creatures on the earth. I was hinting at that earlier, but I mean, it's like, what is a human being? And when we say we have, 98% the same DNA as a chimpanzee, we also have 50% the same DNA as a banana. We are radically interrelated with everything. And I'm a little concerned about I want to. This is not very good dialogue. I apologize for that. But I mean, it's been an excellent dialogue. But what I'm about to say might not be considered good dialogue. But I'm concerned if we start talking about a world human culture, because my experience with, and I think Lisa will relate to this, with language and culture, is that it comes from the land, the specific land where you live. So the everything in nature is speaking. Everything in nature is speaking, and so it's not a coincidence that the places where indigenous people live today, there's also more biodiversity. When we cut down the rainforest, we tend to cut down a lot of relationships that have organically emerged from the speaking land through the people who are open to hearing that and using that kind of language. That kind of language that we sometimes call sacred languages, languages that evoke energies on their own. Whereas English, which I mean, I love English, and there's a lot of beautiful speakers here, but English is largely a representational language. So we have a division between ourselves and the world. And as long as we continue to perceive that way and speak that way in English, we're going to have a hard time breaking through to the Gebserian, a-perspectival, achronal world, because we'll still perpetuate that artificial dichotomy between ourselves and nature. And so I don't know. I'm of two minds with that. I have to listen to, and I really appreciate what's brought in about how the youth are speaking because it's new to me. And the youth are going to bring something in that I'm not going to understand, and I need to understand. But at the same time, I want people to go back to the land and allow that to speak through them. And I think that's where we'll find our healing ultimately. Thanks.
Just want to say good night to everyone. I've got to go to the airport. It's
Okay.
a pleasure and inspirational to speak with you all. Carry on.
Glad to have you, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel.
Drive safely. There's actually, again, this I didn't see anybody else's hand. This nexus at this moment in the dialogue, if I can do a reverse gears, as Steve Rosen would say, somehow, and out of the gears of our ongoing discourse here, and somehow change the perspective that where we see this and that, this is said, that is said, as you were saying, Glenn, as somewhat of a psycholinguistic problem. But if we also hold the paradox to say there's actually a complementarity between what Robert is saying and what you're saying. They are not opposites that must be resolved, perhaps even through violence, which is actually the way it does happen. A lot of the cultural violence, did I say that? Whatever, violence in the 21st century world concerns this, again, incompatible perspectives that are crashing together. With the young people of the world, quite a bit of economic diversity. I mean, how do you rate that on a metric scale? Our lives are more altered again by having a cell phone than by any other single factor in daily life, and that is how communication has changed. There was a coherency in that statement somewhere. I hope you got it. But I was in a session the other day with Doc Hall. Some of you may remember Doc Hall, who was at Asilomar. And Doc's group of folks who convene regularly, a very diverse group, but a lot in government, in business administration in various dimensions, and lots of engineering, lots of applied engineering. This is Doc's group. Love Doc. But at the end of one of their discussions recently, it was very interesting because I'm a little more woo-woo than the general flow. But at any rate, the conversation came down and said, well, you know what we're really talking about? And I said, we're talking about what it is to be human. And I said, well, let's take that up. Let's take up that topic. Which is what we're doing. But this is the question. And then how is that question answered? Then we could move into Lisa's aperspectival diamond facet and say, what if we actually have an integrative sense of all the facets and respect all these facets? And as Gebser, of course, would say, and Jung as well, the language in both cases, engage. Integration, individuation as engagement. And we have all kinds of those who can speak to the notion of engagement, participation. Gebser emphasizes participation. Okay, I better stop.
I just thought one of the things that's an image that's come to mind, one that Jung drew to explain his structures of consciousness, was the so-called it's the geologic diagram. It's he drew layers of sort of lithography all the way down, and at the top is this little island poking out above the ocean, which is the individual, and it sits on something called the family, and that sits on something called the clan, which sits on something called the nation, which, and then you get down to the biological, our closest biological relatives, down through all life, and then down to Earth itself. Okay, so that's all in us. That's all in our psyches. Every aspect of that, and all history is there. Our evolutionary history, our cultural history. It's all present in us at any moment. And then he added one other element to this image, which is a fire. At the very base of this structure is a fire, he called it the eternal fire, which penetrates through all layers up to the top. So I think if we hold that image, which is a very integral image because it's enfolding pretty much everything, all the ways of being, all modes of being, all history, all culture. It's fundamentally rooted in Earth, in our biology, in our evolution. And that central element, which flows through every layer, connects every layer, is for me the thing that we have disconnected with. And it also connects these other dimensions. And I would say, you know, that's the spiritual religious dimension. That if you disconnect from that, if you lose that, then you are no longer aware, or you're less aware of these other parts of yourself, other ways of being present in this moment. And for me, I think that's where I'm at is, how do we bring that into the world? Especially to young people, but to pretty much everybody, because when we don't have that connection, when we've lost it, we'll look for it in very destructive ways. We'll manifest it, we'll seek it, and we'll destroy the very world that we live in, the personal lives that we live, in compulsivity in its many manifestations. So it's absolutely essential that we find that fire and connect to it in our own way. Because if we don't, you know, we'll continue to destroy all those layers, everything that's around us.
So Gebser basically framed EPO as being about the concrescence of the spiritual. So that's, as I see it, Jeff, that's the fire going through all the layers. The spiritual concresses in all of these different ways.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
And Gebser talks about the spiritualization of the personality too, being as being the
We're having connectivity issues, Robert.
I think that my internet's a little bit unstable.
Okay. Well, with
Did you hear that?
no, only enough to say no.
But he's
There.
embodying the past, present, and future coming together.
Yes. Yes, I would tell you a joke about time travel, but you didn't like it. At this juncture of the conversation, and we're heading, somewhat toward bidding adieu. But Jung's statements on the nature of, what it is to be human, particularly as he spoke this, I would say, in answer to Job and how the psychic energies organize themselves. It's possible to speak of regression.
You knew that.
But the eruption of the archaic, and it's certainly my focus is to feel the image of the fire. Yes, let's take that from Jung, and to say when I wake up in the morning and I start to be on my personal worries of the usual sort, but then back to, well, what about the end of life on earth as it has been recognized for some time? How do I live with this? Then to say, well, there is a burning fire. Jung puts it in this very pithy way, which is just a great way to start a theological discussion. But Jung said, love God, but fear him. Now that is a Judeo-Christian orientation. How do we integrate this with other experiences of the numinous, the destructive numinous? We are experiencing extinction and dissociation on unprecedented scales. How do we integrate this? By whatever perspective one may hold. How do we deal with the catastrophe? Steve.
The thought I have, given the magnitude of the catastrophe, is that we need, possibly, to learn the skill of grieving, and we need to make peace with death. Because this culture, if there's anything emblematic of this Western culture, it's the splitting of life and death. So if there can be a dialogue with death, as there is in some indigenous cultures, this may, it would change our whole perspective on imminent catastrophe, the fear of imminent death. What's our attitude toward death? And when we lose a loved one, do we know how to grieve? And I know, given the structure of my ego and the structure of the culture in which I was raised, I'd be pathetic at that. It's a deep learning. And this may link back to what Glenn was saying about becoming more attuned to indigenous consciousness and indigenous language even. So these are things that that may help, possibly, but I say help, and I even wonder about that word. Help with what? Help us survive? Help us defeat death? And it sort of puts us back where we began. So yeah, I think a major change in consciousness is called for. Well, that's obvious. I think we all agree with that, and we agreed with it when we came into the room today. Anyway, that's what I have at the moment.
Very well put.
May I say a couple very
Wow.
brief things, John? I know you're
Yeah,
trying to wrap up.
we will officially end at 9 o'clock, and it's in 3 minutes.
Oh, I'll be briefer than that. I just want to say how beautiful this has been, and appreciate those last remarks, Stephen, very much. And it's almost like grief and love have this reciprocal relationship, because yeah, it's a kind grief is a form of unrequited love. It's a love we can't continue or something, whatever it is for a person or a thing. And I agree with you so much that there's something we have to shift in our way we look at death, and maybe welcome in death as a different doorway, like birth is a doorway, death is a doorway, instead of having it be the finality. Um, and and thank you, Jeff. I thought your everything you said was so beautiful about that, from the geologic diagram of the individual family, the clan, the going down to Mother Earth, and it's just been a beautiful dialogue. Thank you for your group. And what does it mean to be human is a question I love. So thank you so much. It's been a blessing. I'm a little tired now, but I
Yeah.
really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you to
Thank
everyone.
you.
We don't have to vanish, but if any of you want to linger, you can linger, but we are at our closing time, and we always honor that. So
It's so great to see everybody. Thanks so
Goodbye
much.
to all.
Yeah.
All right.
goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you. Thank you much.
So all of you poets out there, how does the rest of that Emily Dickinson poem go? I could not stop for death, so he kindly stopped for me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because I couldn't stop for death, he kindly stopped for me.
Isn't there more to that?
Yeah, much more. It's a wonderful poem. I'll look it up if you want.
I've got Google. I can find it.
Yeah, it's
I think we're ending on some similar things. I've written a lot about listening and receptivity. And when Steve was talking, I thought, how do we listen to death? So that's a new project.
Well, Dylan Thomas can help you with that, Mike, and I will refer you to my forthcoming book.
Okay, yeah, send me another chapter.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's close to a translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, right? It has something to do with hearing, right? So,
Yes.
Yeah.
yes. So thank you. Yes, very good question. Thank you, as always. Thank you. Many blessings.
It's interesting with this group presently assembled, which is extraordinary, but also with our Jung group, as to how our community, so that actually experience ourselves as community now, now, because we're really used to having folks connect from all over the world, just as a regular part of life. And yet we don't have, the core of what we are is, this community, this, I'm willing to call it a spiritual community. I'm not afraid of the word. How will we continue to exist? And we need a committee. That was supposed to be funny. And nobody laughed.